Hello and welcome back to RPG PhD. I'm Dr. Ben, your guide to the strange intersection where narrative theory, cognitive psychology, and goblin stabbing all shake hands. Today we're tackling a problem every table knows intimately, even the really good ones. You build up tension, you set the scene, the stakes are high, and then the fight begins. And somewhere between round 3 and round 6, the whole thing loses altitude. Attention drifts. People check their phones. The emotional rhythm you work so hard to build just sort of dissolves into a long series of micro decisions, math checks, and wait, whose turn is it again? So, grab your dice, your rule set of choice, and maybe a cup of something warm. Let's talk about why combat takes so long and how to make every round actually matter. Before we can fix slow combat, we need to understand what's actually slowing it down. The real-time thieves are subtle, psychological, and structural. They hide in cracks of decision-making, pacing, and table culture. Let's start with something cognitive psychologists have been shouting from rooftops for decades. Working memory is tiny. It can hold around 4 to 7 discrete items before performance collapses. And in many tabletop role-playing game fights, players need to juggle their abilities, enemy positions, conditions, opportunity attacks, action economy, terrain effects, spell riders, team synergies, and the GM's last 3 rulings. That's an unreasonable amount to track moment to moment. According to cognitive load theory, high element interactivity, meaning lots of simultaneous info channels, slows reasoning dramatically. Players don't consciously think, my brain is overloaded. They just think, hold on, and the seconds start quietly bleeding out. Another culprit is choice paralysis, a phenomenon Daniel Kahneman famously connects to systems to overload, slow, effortful thinking that grinds under too many options. Spellcasters usually suffer the most. When you have 27 spells and 40 possible spell states, the brain must evaluate complex action trees before committing. The more optimal a player tries to be, the slower their turn gets. Even if the whole table loves tactical combat, the process can punish decisiveness. Then there's structural fog, unclear objectives that inflate the number of rounds. Many encounters are built around a single default win condition. Reduce everything to 0 hit points. But without a defined purpose, the fight stretches into a shapeless slugfest. Players don't know which decisions matter, so they test every angle. A fight with one goal, buy time for the ritual, or grab the ledger and escape, would end in half the rounds, but without that clarity, players tend to grind. We also see initiative decay. The longer the cycle, the slower the attention. If you act every 7 to 9 minutes, your mind wanders. Research on attentional rhythms shows that humans stay engaged when events land on predictable beats. Traditional initiative can create unpredictable, often lengthy spacing between turns, so players mentally power down and then have to reboot when their name is called. Another hidden leak is rule interruptions, those let me check something moments. Even a 15-second lookup can break the attentional contour of the scene. Salin and Zimmerman describe this as a rupture in play flow, a shift from experiencing the game to managing it. Every interruption isn't just lost seconds, it's lost momentum, and rebuilding momentum costs even more time. And finally, there's the big one, spotlight drag. When one player takes a long turn because their build is complex, or because they're maximizing combos, the rest of the table falls into spectator mode. Robin Laws calls this the uneven spotlight problem, and once attention dissipates, re-engagement slows turns even further. Put all these leaks together, overloaded working memory, choice paralysis, unclear objectives, initiative decay, rule interruptions, spotlight drag, and you get the real reason fights feel bloated. The psychological demands exceed the game's pacing architecture. It's not necessarily about difficulty, it's about design friction. And unless the game master deliberately manages that friction, it accumulates like sand in a gearbox, slowing each round more than the last. The diagnosis then is simple and sobering. Combat takes too long because the structure of decision making isn't aligned with the structure of drama. And once we understand that, we can start building fights where every choice is sharper, every round matters more, and the momentum carries itself. Before I go any further, let me say this clearly. Every table is its own ecosystem. What energizes one group can annoy another. What feels immersive to one party feels intrusive to someone else. Some tables thrive on tactical depth and careful deliberation. Others want fast, cinematic action. Some just want to argue with goblins for an hour and call it a night. So everything I'm offering here, in almost every video I produce, every principle, every tool, every pacing technique, isn't a commandment, it's a menu. My purpose isn't to say my way is the best way or my way is the only way, because it isn't, and it shouldn't be. My goal is to educate, to expand your toolkit, to give you new lenses to look through. If your table is struggling with slow combat or sagging tension, maybe one of these ideas helps. Maybe it sparks a conversation. Maybe it leads you to invent something better that fits your own group dynamic. This hobby thrives on experimentation, so take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and remember, there are many ways to play tabletop role-playing games, and all of them can be great when they fit the people at the table. My job isn't to prescribe, it's to offer possibilities. What you do with them is where the real magic happens. With that said, let's explore some general principles that can perhaps help you think about combat differently. First principle, shorten decisions, not possibility. If there's one misconception game masters fall into again and again, it's the belief that speeding up combat means limiting player agency. If I want the fight to move faster, the thinking goes, I need to reduce choices. But in practice, the opposite can be true. Players slow down when choices lack shape, not when choices lack quantity. The real goal isn't to prune options, it's to make the meaningful options obvious so players can commit confidently without scanning the entire tactical universe. This is the difference between decision compression and decision restriction. Restriction removes branches. Compression makes the right branches easier to see. Cognitive science backs this up. When options are organized, contextualized, or framed clearly, decision speed increases dramatically, even if the underlying complexity stays the same. This is called choice architecture. The choices don't change, the presentation changes, reducing friction and cognitive cost. In role-playing game terms, players usually know what they want to do emotionally. Be brave, protect a friend, take a risk in the fight. But they often struggle to translate that emotional intent into mechanical action. That gap is where the seconds can leak away. If you help players articulate intent first and only then select mechanics, decision time drops without robbing anyone of cleverness or creativity. This is why systems like Blades in the Dark explicitly separate intent, what I want to happen, from method, how I'm doing it, and position or effect, how risky or potent is this. The structure cuts through the noise and elevates the fiction. What looks like a mechanical trick is actually a cognitive aid. So the job of the game master is not necessarily to simplify combat, it's to simplify access to choices. So here's some practical tools that might help you do that. The intent method effect loop. The player states first their intent, what they want the outcome to be. Then the method, how they're trying to achieve it, and then the effect, the hoped for impact. This keeps players from digging through character sheets to find an action. They begin with the fiction and you guide them toward mechanics that support what they want. It's not constraint, it's clarity. Next, the two good choices prompt. If a player freezes for more than 10 seconds, offer two solid, fictionally grounded actions. You can push up aggressively for a risky strike or hold position and force them to come to you. This is not meant to be hand-holding, it's meant to be scaffolding. Behavioral economist Gigerenzer notes that choice paralysis melts when decisions are framed as bounded, not infinite. Two good choices don't end creativity, they can kickstart it. Also, make the space tell a story. Combat moves faster when the environment telegraphs possibilities. In cognitive psychology, these are called affordances, visual cues that suggest available actions. Story-rich spaces can create decision density without cognitive overload. That paradox, more meaningful choices, fewer slow decisions, is the true magic of good encounter architecture. It feels counterintuitive, but give it a try. Reducing invisible options. Players slow down not because they necessarily have too many options, but because they feel obligated to scan for hidden ones. Every rule, aura, condition, or rider that isn't visible creates a perceived burden. What am I forgetting? What obscure interaction am I missing? Give standard turn templates that fit the character. Players act faster when they're not reinventing themselves every round. So a turn template is a character's default pattern. For example, I shoot, I move 10 feet, I take cover. I hit, then I shove, then taunt. I cast, I command my familiar, then I reposition. When players know their default, they only modify the template when the situation demands it. This is a core principle from role theory. Roles reduce cognitive strain by providing predictable behavioral scripts. Your fighter has a script, your ranger has a script, your wizard has a script. Scripts can speed up turns. You're not trying to reduce choice, you're trying to reduce lag. Speeding combat doesn't come from limiting creativity, it comes from giving creativity a runway. When you shorten the path to decisions, the decisions themselves stay rich, expressive, and personal. You're shifting the cognitive labor from analyze all possible options to express the thing my character wants most. In other words, fast combat doesn't mean less storytelling, it means removing the barriers that keep players from telling the story. Principle 2. Architect the fight before it begins. Most game masters think combat begins when dice hit the table. It doesn't. Combat begins the moment players understand the situation they're stepping into. Everything that slows an encounter later, confusion, indecision, overplanning, grinding attrition, usually enters the scene before initiative ever rolls. So the more intentional you are about designing the fight's narrative and mechanical scaffolding, the faster and sharper the encounter becomes. Think of this like stagecraft. In theater, a scene doesn't always succeed because actors improvise well. It succeeds because the environment, stakes, and blocking are already doing half the storytelling. Role-playing game combat is no different. If your players walk into a space with no clear objective and no tension cues, their brains default to the most general interpretation possible. We fight until everything stops moving. That ambiguity can be a real time waster. So declare the objective explicitly. The objective is the heart of the encounter. It tells players what the fight is really about. And the answer can be kill them all, but that's a task, not a purpose. Bowman's work on player motivation emphasizes that clarity of intention, knowing the functional purpose of an activity, reduces uncertainty and increases group cohesion. In combat, that means laying out a goal players can immediately internalize. Hold the door for 3 rounds. Stop the assassin before they reach the balcony. Free the prisoners before the fire spreads. Grab the artifact and escape. You've now replaced a vague sandbox with a sharp problem. The encounter suddenly has momentum baked in because players are no longer trying to optimize for every possible future. They're optimizing toward a known finish line. Clear objectives can reduce combat length by reducing strategic drift. The wandering, hedging, and wait, what are we doing again? Moments that squeeze minutes out of every round. Also, think about or consider adding a real timer. Timers create urgency. Urgency creates decisiveness. Decisiveness creates shorter fights, theoretically. Music psychologist David Huron calls this temporal tension, the sense that something inevitable is rushing toward you. This tension can be pleasurable because it forces the brain to anticipate, respond, and stay engaged. A timer can be literal or narrative, but it must matter. A ritual completes in 4 rounds. Guards arrive in 3 alarms. The chamber floods after 5 ticks. The dragon's breath recharges on a countdown. The magic of a timer is that it turns combat into a race instead of a grind. Players make faster choices because the cost of inaction is visible. Even if you, the game master, never let the timer hit 0, its presence acts as an external metronome, an attention rhythm that keeps players actively tuned in. Design a twist that changes the geometry. A twist is the beat where the fight becomes about something else, but you have to use them sparingly. Every combat shouldn't have a twist. Robin Law's work on pacing emphasizes the importance of beat changes, moments where the emotional or tactical energy shifts direction. In role-playing game combat, a beat change should reframe the situation. So, for example, the ground cracks, a new hazard forms. Reinforcements arrive, but from an unexpected angle. The necromancer drops concentration, and the skeletons collapse. The giant tears down the scaffolding and changes line of sight. The twist doesn't have to elongate the fight, it prevents stagnation. It keeps the brain from slipping into autopilot. That means players stay engaged and maybe choose faster. You can also think about pre-deciding the encounter's exit conditions. Unplanned fights drift because no one knows when they're supposed to be over, or it only ends when everything is dead. When you architect the fight ahead of time, you decide what counts as completion. When the boss hits bloodied, they flee. When 3 objectives are reached, the encounter ends. When the relic is secured, combat transitions to escape mode. When half the minions fall, the rest surrender. This is supported by game design theory. Salin and Zimmerman note that well-designed games clarify victory and failure states to reduce unnecessary play loops. The moment players achieve the objective, the encounter ends, even if enemies are still on the battlefield. You're declaring that the fight is a story beat, not a clearance operation. Preview the emotional stakes. Combat is not just a tactical puzzle, it's a dramatic moment. A fight becomes slow when players don't care emotionally, because emotional investment narrows focus. Before initiative, frame the stakes in 1 sentence. If you lose, the village burns. If you fail, she dies alone. This is the last line before the darkness spreads. Psychology tells us that emotion sharpens decision-making by focusing attention and increasing certainty. A clear emotional stake acts like a spotlight. It points players to what matters, mitigating hesitation. Fast combat is built like a good scene. Clear purpose, clear structure, clear tension. When you shape objectives, timers, twists, space, and stakes, you're giving players a map of the story they're in. And when players know the story, it gives them the opportunity to act faster, bolder, and with more emotional clarity. Combat feels slower when it's directionless. Combat feels faster when it is purpose-built. Architecture is not about scripting outcomes, it's about scripting momentum. Principle 3. Streamline the math the audience never sees. One of the biggest misconceptions about speeding up combat is that the slowdown happens during the big dramatic moments. When someone casts a gigantic spell, unleashes a combo, or rolls a handful of dice. That's not necessarily true. One giant consumer of time is the silent math that no one realizes they're doing. Tiny modifiers, overlapping conditions, multi-step damage calculations, sequential rolls that could have been combined, and repeated arithmetic that adds nothing to the drama. Game designers like Salin and Zimmerman call this hidden computation, the part of play that the audience doesn't experience but still eats cognitive resources. In a video game, the computer does that work. In a tabletop RPG, you do. And because the work is often invisible, players tolerate it without seeing how much momentum it steals. The key insight for game masters is this: you should preserve the math the audience feels and eliminate the math the audience never really experiences. When the consequence is dramatic, like shattering the Lich's phylactery, the math supports the moment. But when you're rolling 3 separate damage dice for 3 identical goblins, that's more friction than drama. This principle comes down to a single question. Is this computational step improving the player's experience of the scene? If not, collapse it. So let's look at some of the categories of invisible math that can bog down combat and how to streamline them without sacrificing fairness or tension. Roll fewer dice without reducing impact. Most systems assume each creature rolls separately to hit and damage, but from a pacing perspective, this can be wasteful. The players usually only care about whether the attack mattered, not the full simulation. So collapse identical rolls into a single expression. A group of mooks uses one to hit roll. Apply hits or misses to the cluster. AoE spells or volleys get one damage roll for all targets. Most games already do this, but not all. Environmental effects use static values instead of per target rolls. This is not meant to dumb down the game, it's meant to remove duplicated computation. Jesper Juhl's half-real framework reminds us that games aren't simulations, they're abstractions that feel like simulations. As long as the abstraction is emotionally convincing, players never notice they've been spared 6 redundant dice rolls. Average damage for routine hits, roll only for drama. Averaging damage is one of the simplest and most powerful pacing tools available. When damage isn't the point of the moment, use the average. When damage is the moment, critical hits, spell bursts, heroic finishing blows, roll. This aligns with cognitive psychology's distinction between foreground attention and background attention. Rolling damage is foreground when stakes are high, background when stakes are routine. Consolidate condition tracking into visible binary states. Most systems bury conditions in text or rely on memory that creates invisible load. Wait, is it still poisoned? Does prone give advantage or disadvantage? These questions are deceptively small but cognitively expensive. Make conditions binary, visible, and external. Tokens for stun, silence, restrain, those sorts of things. Colored rings or acrylic halos. Index cards under miniatures. Bleed 3, rooted -2 movement, that sort of thing. By externalizing some of the game state, you can shift the burden from working memory to environmental memory, a concept Norman highlights as key to reducing cognitive strain. When players can see conditions, they spend less time recalling and more time acting in the moment. Pre-compute monster turns before combat. This is one of the most radically effective techniques and one that doesn't get talked about enough. Before the session, you can pre-calculate the abilities for each monster or NPC. Depending on the system, you would calculate things like its total attack bonus, expected damage, and even average damage, special action triggers, easy reference for DCs that would use, simplified versions of multi-step abilities, so things that are once per fight, like a slam plus a shove, those kinds of things. And maybe even an order about when the creature would actually do these things. What you're really doing is offloading the micro decisions you normally make during combat. Which ability to use, which target to choose, how to sequence attacks. When the Game Master's turn is fast, the entire table's pacing can be improved. Delegate math to players who really enjoy it. Some players love quick mental arithmetic, others don't. This creates a natural, benign discrepancy in combat tempo. A simple fix, assign the math rolls to players who enjoy them. Let a player track the enemy's damage threshold. Let someone else run minion hit points. Delegate initiative tracking. Let your rules-brain player handle group damage or group saves. Long combat isn't necessarily about numbers. It's about the unexamined friction between the numbers. Principle 4. Pre-commit to rulings that favor flow. If we're being honest, sometimes the drag in combat doesn't come from the players at all. It comes from the Game Master's moment of doubt. That instant where they pause and think, wait, how does this rule work again? You hesitate, you reach for the book. Someone starts a side conversation, someone else checks their phone, and suddenly you've broken the dramatic arc of the fight. In theater, this is called a rupture in the performance frame. The audience feels the break even if they don't fully understand what caused it. In cognitive terms, this is a context switch. And context switching is brutally expensive, cognitively. Once the table leaves combat mode and enters lookup mode, the collective rhythm collapses. So the Game Master's goal isn't to know every rule, it's to protect the rhythm. And the best way to do that is to pre-commit to how you're going to handle ambiguities before the ambiguity arises. This is essentially a game master facing form of heuristic decision making. Use a consistent, lightweight rule that gets you a fast, fair answer without dragging the scene. It may not be the perfect ruling, but it's the right one for the table's momentum. So let's take a look at some possibilities. The 15-second ruling rule. State this clearly at session 0. If a rules question can't be resolved in 15 seconds, I will make a fair ruling now and look it up after the scene. This is not meant to be a power move, it's a social contract. Players know the expectation, you know the expectation, and most importantly, the scene keeps moving. This matches Salin and Zimmerman's point that games rely on a primary experience loop supported by a secondary interpretive loop. Interpretation, rule lookup, should never interrupt the primary loop, play, unless absolutely necessary. When you codify this norm, the table might stop treating each rule lookup as a referendum on fairness and start treating it as a natural part of improvisational flow. More like stage blocking than courtroom procedure. The highest bonus wins. Stacking modifiers is the hidden vice of slow combat. Everyone has played at a table where someone says, wait, I think I have a +1 from the aura. Oh, and +2 from the hill. And wait, and hold on. The truth is that +1 and +2 modifiers rarely change behavior. They just change the math, of course. Psychologically, these micro mods create decision drag without offering meaningful choices. So adopt a simple heuristic. If multiple small modifiers apply, only the highest one counts. It also reduces the feeling that the game master is cherry picking. The rule is simple, stable, fair, and public, and hopefully will provoke fewer arguments. The ruling log. One of the biggest fears players have when game masters ignore strict rules as written is inconsistency. A decision made on the fly can contradict one made earlier, and players begin to feel the ground shifting under their feet. So create a ruling log, a simple note card or Google Doc where you jot down the question, the ruling you made, the page number if you find it later, whether you're adopting your ruling as house consensus. This is the Game Master version of Donald Schoen's reflection in action. You improvise a solution, then integrate the useful innovations back into the system. Over time, your rulings become part of a stable table culture. Your players feel consistency, and you never have to solve the same ambiguity twice. Favor narrative integrity over procedural purity. This isn't about replacing the rules with the rule of cool. It's about acknowledging, as Jesper Juhl puts it in Half Real, that games live in the tension between rules and fiction. Sometimes the fiction demands speed and the rules demand precision. When those tensions collide, choose the ruling that keeps the fiction alive. For example, if a player describes a bold maneuver, don't pause to cross-reference the 3 grappling sub-rules. Let them roll a check and move on. If a monster dies but the exact damage type triggers a niche effect, resolve the death and ignore the effect. If a spell and a condition intersect weirdly, choose the interpretation that keeps the moment exciting and revisit the rules later. Think of it like jazz improvisation. You're balancing structure and spontaneity. The rhythm is more important than the sheet music. Establish flow-first defaults. A flow-first default is a simple, table-approved principle that resolves common ambiguities without discussion. Some examples. Tie goes to the defender. Movement is generous unless it breaks a major rule. Creatures act with genre-appropriate intelligence even if stat blocks are vague. If you narrate something cool and plausible, you get advantage or some sort of effect bonus. These defaults prevent the negotiation spiral, the moment when the table shifts from playing to co-arbitrating game rules. Defaults are not meant to be constraints, they're meant to be lubricants. They reduce the need to debate and increase the freedom to act. Declare these norms explicitly to your group. Pre-commitment only works when it's shared. If you start making rulings quickly without warning, players may feel rushed or overruled. But if the norms are socialized ahead of time, players understand you're protecting the table's collective experience. Some players don't care if every rules is written perfect. They care that the fight feels alive, responsive, dramatic, and fair. Principle 5. Make every round do story work. Here's the uncomfortable truth about most tabletop combat. A lot of rounds simply don't matter. They advance the hit point totals, but not the story, not the stakes, not the emotional arc of the scene. They're mechanically alive and narratively dead. And dead rounds are one of the reasons battles bloat into hour-long slogs. If a round doesn't reveal new information, change someone's position, raise the danger, shift the emotional state, or reframe the conflict, it isn't a round. It's mechanical housekeeping. And housekeeping can be boring. So players disengage. So turns slow down. So the fight expands. So the tension collapses. It can become a death spiral. Drama theorists have been talking about this problem long before role-playing games existed. Aristotle called it peripeteia, the reversal, the beat where a scene changes direction. In modern dramaturgy, it's often phrased as every beat must move something. When a beat only repeats what we already know, the audience can detach. The same logic applies to encounters in role-playing games. If you want faster, tighter, more engaging combat, then every round must accomplish a narrative function. The mechanics are the delivery system, not the point. So let's look at some possibilities. A round should change the state of the scene. Every round should produce at least one meaningful state change. For example, a PC or NPC or threat goes down. Reinforcements arrive. The environment shifts. An enemy tactic changes. A new danger appears. A goal is achieved or threatened. These all don't have to be big twists, some can be subtle, but something must shift or the round can become static. Richard Schechner in Performance Theory argues that dramatic action unfolds through transformation. Characters, space, or stakes must alter for the performance to maintain momentum. Combat is no different. Without transformation, you're watching the same three moves in a loop. A round should reveal something about the characters. Combat is character exposition by other means. A round where a player character simply swings a sword is a round of wasted storytelling. But a round where the player character protects a wounded ally, presses a moral boundary, risks everything for a daring strike, or hesitates in fear, is a round that tells us who they are. Even a miss can reveal something: frustration, desperation, bravado, fear. Joseph Campbell argued that trials reveal a hero's identity more than triumphs do. So let every round be a trial of sorts. A round should escalate or clarify the stakes. If the stakes remain constant, the fight doesn't advance the story. Escalation can be physical, the ceiling collapses; mechanical, the ritual intensifies; emotional, the cult leader mocks your failure; or moral, saving your friend will cost the prisoner's life. In narrative design, this is called progressive complication. A round should give players a reason to care about the outcome. This doesn't require melodrama, but if the round doesn't reinforce the peril, the goal, or the cost of failure, it can drift into abstraction. For example, the portal flickers, it won't stay open much longer. The villagers are screaming behind the barricade. The demon's laughter rattles your confidence. A round should advance the encounter towards its end condition. An encounter that doesn't move toward resolution becomes a treadmill. Every round should make the ending feel closer, not further away. Game design scholar Miguel Sicart points out that good games create a continuum of meaningful actions. Each step brings you closer to a consequence. Combat should follow the same principle. This is why objective-based combat moves faster. Each round produces measurable progress. A round should shift tactics, either theirs or yours. Rounds feel repetitive when tactics stagnate. This is often blamed on the players, but it could also be a problem with the game master. When monsters change behavior, formation, aggression, targeting priorities, or goals, it forces players to adapt, which produces fresh micro-stakes each round. This is Carl Iglesias' concept of constant micro-tension. Tension doesn't just arise across acts, it rises inside every beat. So a practical implementation, you can think about the round audit. To keep this principle actionable, adopt a simple internal habit as a game master. Before you call the next initiative number, ask yourself, did something meaningful happen this round? If the answer is no, add a shift, a clue, a danger spike, a new wrinkle, or a sharpened stake immediately. Combat is not a pause in the story. Combat is also a part of the story. When every round generates transformation of stakes, of space, of emotion, of character, combat becomes a living scene rather than a mechanical checkpoint. Fast combat isn't the absence of detail. Fast combat is the absence of dead beats. And when every round does story work, something remarkable happens. Players stop watching the initiative order and start watching the narrative. Principle 6. Help players move before their turn. One of the most dramatic improvements you can make to combat speed and to player engagement is teaching your table how to take their turn before their turn begins. Not mechanically, but cognitively. In most games, players only start thinking when their name is called. Until then, they're spectators. And spectatorship is passive. Passive attention drifts. And when attention drifts, decision time increases. That's not a moral failing, it's basic cognitive science. There's a well-studied phenomenon psychologists call anticipatory processing, the brain's ability to prepare an action before it's required. In simple terms, when you know what's coming, you move faster. This is why athletes practice ready stance, why musicians pre-hear phrases in their minds, and why improvisers in theater maintain active listening even when they're not speaking. Combat is no different. If players are mentally preparing on other people's turns, their own turns shrink dramatically. But that only happens if the game master structures the scene to invite anticipation instead of waiting. Most tables don't do this. They default to a turn silos mentality. Everyone waits, then plays, then waits again. The result is predictable. Cognitive warm-up happens during a player's turn instead of before it. Your job as game master is to break those silos. So let's examine some possible tools. Declare initiative like a rhythm, not a roll. If your initiative calls are unpredictable or slow, players don't know when to mentally spin up. But if initiative has a steady cadence, players can better anticipate their turn naturally. So for example, Arya, you're on deck. Garrick, you're up next. Liz, you're after that. This tiny, consistent micro update activates anticipatory processing. It's the role-playing game equivalent of a stage manager whispering cues. Research in attentional rhythm shows that humans synchronize their cognitive readiness to predictable beats. A steady initiative beat means the table's attention cycles in sync rather than randomly. Encourage players to use in-between turn time as preparation time. Most players treat off-turn time as waiting time. Redefine it as planning time. Not in a rigid, authoritarian way, just frame the expectation. While others take their turn, keep an eye on the situation and think about what you want to do next. That way you're ready when it's your moment. Cognitive load theory tells us that breaking a complex decision into smaller pre-processing chunks dramatically reduces decision time. So between turns is the perfect place for those little chunks. Use visuals to maintain battlefield awareness. Players often make faster choices when they don't have to ask for context. The more immediately visible the situation is, the more accurate and rapid their mental rehearsal becomes. So, minis on a grid, for example, a digital combat tracker if you're playing online, condition markers, arrow tokens for movement intent or conditions, threat cones or aura rings for enemy effects, a simple enemy health cube, bloodied or wounded, that sort of thing. This is called externalizing cognition. You're offloading memory demands onto the environment. When the state of the battle is visible, players spend less time reconstructing it mentally. Now, not everyone likes to play this way, and theater of the mind is still popular with many tables, And there are game masters who feel strongly that theater of the mind, when used in the right way, can also speed up combat, but usually for different reasons. Let players roll damage with their attack rolls. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this is a tiny rule tweak with a massive psychological benefit. When players roll to hit, wait for hit confirmation, roll damage, narrate the result. There are multiple pauses in cognition. If they roll both sets of dice together, you eliminate an entire step of the turn, but more importantly, you maintain rhythmic continuity. Even if you don't confirm damage immediately, players already have the result in hand. They stay in motion, not in limbo. When you help players move before their turn, you transform a rigid sequence of isolated actions into a shared kinetic rhythm. The whole table becomes a thinking organism, not 6 individuals waiting in line. That's the secret. Combat isn't a cue. Combat is a current. And once everyone starts moving with it, the whole scene accelerates. So that wraps up our video on combat speed. If you found this video useful, please hit that like button. And if you haven't, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel. Also, drop your favorite speed up trick in the comments below. I look forward to reading them. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.